Meeting to order, July 22nd, 2020, and it's 2:30. We will start with the flag salute by Mr. Paul.
Put your right hand over your heart. Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Report of closed session, we didn't take any action. So we will move to public comments. Ms. Now, do you have any public comments?
Yes, we do today. So at this point in our agenda, we're inviting the public to address the board. This is a special meeting, so all topics should be given comment to what's on the agenda for today. Time will be limited to 3 minutes. And we are going to begin with Ray Colado.
Good afternoon, board and cabinet members. Today you will be voting on a new tentative agreement between CNUSD and CNTA for the reopening of schools. We appreciate your patience while we work to try to begin planning for the safe start for the 2021 school year. While we all wish circumstances were different, we believe this agreement will provide the best instructional support and safety for students and staff. Therefore, we ask that the board vote to approve the MOU in its entirety and allow us to begin preparations for the school year. Thank you.
Next, we have Anna Curry Mesa.
I won't need minutes to say this. I just wanted to express my appreciation and my gratitude. I know that this has been a very difficult process for everybody involved, and I appreciate the time and consideration that you've taken to get here. And all I ask as a parent is that you just remember safety and stability for our children. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ryan Thomas.
How you doing? I'm Ryan Thomas. Get students at Orange and Santiago. And we were kind of surprised by this meeting. We reviewed the MOU and the CNTA, and I'd like to know why is the union able to negotiate for a hybrid return to education when the board and district have dismissed that option, citing that it'd be too costly and present a scheduling nightmare? Does it mean that a hybrid return will be happening, or does it mean that we will stay remote until a physical return is possible? Allowing bargaining to happen using the hybrid as a tool that was dismissed doesn't sit right with us. I'd like to thank CNTA for stipulating that students shall return to school, for which they are enrolled as July 1st. But allowing the union to have a 3-week window between the board deciding to have the students return on campus is excessive and not what was in the best interest of the students, especially when it was stated earlier in the MOU that teachers have 24-hour notice and 1 P day before the physical return. It makes us feel like we're kind of on our heels here and not really prepared to make a proper decision for our kids. We have big time concerns over the hybrid models versus going back traditionally or remotely, understanding that some of that's just out of your control. But I just felt like I had to be here to kind of give a voice to a lot of the kids. I'm also the commissioner for Corona Chargers And I guess yesterday we had 2 cancel their season. So we got a lot of kids that are super upset about that, but again, not your issue. I'm just saying that socially these kids have just been hammered, and a lot of them are going through a lot of tough times, including my own. So I understand that there's an agreement on the board for the board to decide upon the day. I implore you guys to really consider getting these kids back in school. It's taken a serious effect on their mental stabilities, and there's been some very tragic events that happened in the wake of it. So with that being said, I just would like again implore you guys to consider getting back if we can as soon as possible. Thanks, Lord.
Thank you.
Next, we have Devin Thomas.
I spoke last time we had a meeting here, and so this time I'm going to be reading the instruction for my son. He's a 15-year-old who does a summertime group from the sophomore year. It says, since COVID reared its ugly head, we left school March 13th. So much has changed and not much for the good. The curve was slow. We were asked to stay separated from our family and friends, but we are still being held away from our loved ones. And my sports, which have played my whole life, have been basically swooped up and taken from me. I miss it. I want to play the game I love with the people I love. We need to find some sort of normal. And I know I spoke to you guys 2 weeks ago about a couple of suicides that I had been involved with at Children's Hospital, and they're coming in by the guards right now. It is devastating what's happening. I've worked there for almost 20 years. I've never had this many overdoses and suicide attempts. And it's like for a week we have more than we would have for almost a whole year. It's devastating. So I know that that's out of your control now that Newsom has closed everything while we're under certain guidelines with our numbers. But I just want you guys to keep that in mind. Thank you.
And last, we have Lorena Lopez.
Good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to come on behalf of CSEA Chapter 369 to say thank you for the hard work and collaboration with the district. And we know that together we will be working continuously to keep our staff, students, and communities safe. Thank you.
On behalf of the Board of Education, thank you for your comments. Although the board will not respond to your concerns at this time, please be assured that all comments are taken seriously. And a staff member or someone will be following up with you for the communication. Thank you, Madam President.
Okay, we will move on to human resources. Mr. Gonzalez.
So thank you, Madam President and Board. So there are 2 items for consideration today. The one is a look at memorandum of understanding MOUs that have been negotiated with our bargaining group, CSEA and CNUSD.
Could you use your microphone?
Oh, sure. There you go. So, thank you, Madam President. As I said, there are 2 items under consideration for discussion and action. The first is MOU with CNTA, and the second is MOU with CSEA for the reopening of schools. So I'd be happy to entertain any questions you may have, and then have a chance to review both of the MOUs, or if you prefer me to go through them in length, I'd be happy to do that as well.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes, Dr. Weiss.
Yeah. I want to either you or our superintendent or whoever could connect SB 98 to this MOU, because this MOU talks about virtual learning, virtual school, and SB 98 provides that there's several components that should be met for this virtual or remote or distance learning to happen effectively. There should be devices and connectivity, right? I know NODPO is working on that. We should have content aligned with grade level standards. Dr. Simon is working on that too. But the challenging part of SB 98, which connects to the MOU, and I'm not saying we have to change MOU. Maybe this is something that could be added to agreement to meet and negotiate to talk about it. And that's the support for all types of students, including the special needs students, foster kids, homeless kids, English learners, kids with mental health. And I think the MOU is quiet on that respect. And the other thing is daily life interactions. I know the MOU mentioned that too, but I think we need to clarify to our school community what we really mean by virtual school. Because by virtual school, in my point of view, looking at our own program, is really concentrating on ingenuity. So when they talk about the one that gives to be in virtual school, we have to make sure that they understand that it's really ingenuity, which is a teaching package, right? Now, if we're doing something beyond ingenuity, like Ingenuity Plus, maybe our district is doing some adaptation, because Ingenuity is pretty structured as a teaching package. But if CNUSD is adding some adaptations for the homeless kids, for English learners, for foster kids, for kids with mental health, and those who are in special needs, I think we should be clear on that. It's not in the MOU. And also the daily life interactions. How do you do daily life interactions if you're using a teaching package? So we have to be clear on that. Because if I'm a parent in this district, well, daily interactions, when you look at Ingenuity or others where, it doesn't really lend itself unless the district makes some effective adaptation to make it work. Because we want our virtual offering to be equally effective and efficient compared to the traditional, right? Because when we say we're offering a two program, those two programs should be of high quality. And I hope that it reaches you. That's my idea of bringing it up. Not to negate the MOU, but to include that in your future conversation. And maybe Dr. Simon can respond to it if she wants to.
Sure. So, Dr. Lutz, I'll begin. I jotted down a couple of the questions and point of clarification, and then specifically to the virtual school, I'll hand it off to Dr. Simon and what that structure is going to look like. But in terms of SB 98, which is the trailer bill, the bill does inform a lot of the information in the memorandum of understanding with CNTA. Specifically, some of the specific provisions in it that are informed by the statute are the instructional minutes that are listed in it for each of the grade spans. Those are outlined in the section 43501, sections A through F. So that is one portion that we captured in the MOU specifically out of that trailer bill. The second does address the need for daily live interaction, and the trailer bill is very specific in section 43503 B6 on what that is. And that is that each child has interaction with a certificated teacher and peers for the purposes of instruction, progress monitoring, and maintaining connection. So that social emotional component are all explicitly stated in the trailer bill itself. So when we reference daily live interactions, that is what we were talking about. Additionally, in the MOU, there is the provision of attendance and reporting, which is indeed in a remote environment or in a non-traditional environment, does have some very specific provisions that our teachers will need to work through, obviously with the support of their administrators. But one is a daily record keeping, and that's outlined in the MOU, and then also a weekly engagement verification, which is outlined as well. So those components are specifically outlined in SB 98 that we captured here. As far as your questions regarding remote versus virtual and what those look like, I'll pass it to Dr. Simon so she can discuss those pages.
Well, before, let me just respond to your response. I think SB 98, and you did not mention it, there's also a provision of learning continuity plan. And under the continuity plan, I know that all districts are required to submit to the state how we're going to measure student participation and academic progress through synchronous instruction. We have to write that and submit it to the state. The state is also asking us to address learning loss from COVID-19. I think those are important elements that's why I said you gotta talk about it in negotiation. How do you address the learning loss of students from COVID-19? How will you conduct outreach to students and parents when students are not engaging or absent? And the other one you already addressed, addressing those different social activities of kids, English learners, fostering youth homeless, and so on. But a very important element that needed to be discussed, and I'm sure our district have to submit this paperwork. We have to show the state how we're measuring participation and academic progress through synchronous, very, very specific, through synchronous instruction. And how are we going to address learning loss?
So I appreciate bringing up, and to be sure, the process of writing the MOU is iterative. I mean, we know that there are, we do have provisions in the MOU that speak to going back and talking about what a hybrid model or traditional back to school model would look like. So the issues regarding continuity of learning and learning loss will continue to be discussed. Of course, the trailer bill itself, what's captured in the MOU is specific to the working conditions of teachers. It is not an exhaustive statement of the bill itself. That obviously has to be complied with. So in terms of where those intersect with the working conditions of teachers, those will be captured and discussed at the table. We are going back, like I said, tomorrow for a full day of negotiations to continue working on those details. So both the continuity plan and the learning loss, how we're going to work on that are two topics that we'll certainly take under consideration and our work at the table.
Sorry, looking forward to later.
Yeah, and just to speak to remote, I'll start with remote learning and then I'll talk about virtual learning. Remote learning is far different today, and as you know, we have schools in session, our year-round schools who are engaged in remote learning. And it is different than it was during our time in distance learning in the spring. The accountability measures are in place. As a matter of fact, I got a report today from one of our schools who reported that they have 97% student attendance. They know that by the engagement that's taking place daily remotely with their teachers. And the plan is in place to track down the 13 students that were not in attendance to find out what the case is, what kind of supports they may need, and develop an action plan for each one of those, each one of our students. So our principals and their staff are doing a great job monitoring the attendance. And that's one of the accountability measures that we have in remote learning that we did not have during distance learning. So in distance learning, it was kind of an at-will. If you'd like to come, you can come, or you can accept the grade that you had when we closed on that last day of school in an in-person environment. Well, that's different now. Daily attendance, grades, interaction with your teachers throughout the day, a learning plan. Our teachers have been involved in engaging with their parents, with the students' parents,
here in the Eastville area, because those are the schools we're talking about that are in remote learning. And that will continue in all of our schools when we open. I want to segue into virtual schools because we've heard of Hybrid School of Innovation, which is our school that we have housed at JFK. And we have always had a virtual strand there for at least the past 6 years. And that was kind of like an independent study program where students were engaged in Odysseyware and Edgenuity. And it's a learning based online program which requires a lot of independent study, if you will. And they are required to meet certain requirements. Their interaction with their teacher in a live situation is different. It's less than, if you will. However, with that said, because of our trailer bill, let me state that in that particular virtual setting, we have less than 200 students enrolled in that setting, and it's like an independent setting. So I want to put that aside and then talk about the virtual setting that exists right now in our COVID situation, where we have several thousand students enrolled. They will be engaged in on-live instruction, and they will follow the trailer bill just like all of our other students. What will be different in this virtual setting, in this virtual program using Edgenuity, is that Edgenuity will be customized by the teacher. So there will be that interaction with teacher and students with their peers. And it's following the same concepts and requirements, if you will, from the trailer bill. So that is different from the virtual setting that we've had in the past prior to COVID. And you can see that both the current remote learning that we have in place, along with the virtual program that we are going to start in the very near future, are rigorous with high expectations. We know that we're in difficult situations, but we don't lower our expectations for our students' learning and achievement. And that's what we're focused on.
So the question to the remote and specifically, I think on the MOU on section 6, part 3, or part C, 8, which talks about the engaging the daily live interactions that you just alluded to with Dr. Lawless. So we do have the benefit of having some of our year-round schools already engaging in this, and for the most part, we've gotten some really good feedback from parents. But there have been some questions. So I think just for my clarification, some of the questions we had, for example, a tape video segment of a teacher who's taped themselves and are showing that. That is not a definition of live daily interaction.
Yes, so remember the instructional minutes can be met by a combination of daily live interaction and then independent work that is accessed by the student, completed by the work. So our understanding of daily live interaction is just that it is a live telephonic interaction between the teacher and students and their peers for the purposes, as we said, laid out in the trailer bill, instruction, progress monitoring, and maintaining connection between each other. That is a portion of how those daily instructional minutes are met. Certainly recorded instructional pieces that the teachers may do and post on their LMS for students to access could all be considered in totality of those daily instructional minute requirements, but would not meet the requirement of the daily live interaction.
Okay, I just needed clarification on that. As we get emails, I just needed to make sure we were talking the same language. So, because that is important, because again, I think that I'm glad that we have that in here, because the social emotional aspect is going to be much more difficult to ascertain, and so we need that daily interaction. And I know teachers feel that same way, but we're getting questions on, okay, well, this is all they did that day, or we had a Zoom once a week, and that's not what our interpretation of daily live interaction was. And I know that you guys are working on that. It's an ever, it's a learning process for everybody. So I just wanted to make sure that those are clarified, so when we do get those emails after directing them to you, we
I think it would be, kind of piggybacking on what Bill's saying, I think it would be good at our next board meeting, which is August 4th. Why don't we have, because we have 6 schools that have been doing it now, and for the most part, I think we've all gotten pretty good feedback. Has it been perfect? No, but it is totally different than what we did in April and May. But I think the public, when we say trailer bill, the public doesn't know what we're talking about. It's the standards in which we have to live under now that didn't even exist then. Because initially, March 13th, when we shut the doors, we were thinking a couple, 2, maybe 3 weeks, and here we are, 4.5 months later almost. So the legislator stepped up and put forth much more rigorous guidelines. So I think it would be good if we had maybe a couple of our principals, maybe even a couple of our teachers, and I'd like to see maybe a couple of our students, maybe a first grader, and then maybe even a 6th grader, and their parents come and really talk through what that difference is today versus what they experienced in May or April and May. I think folks will have a better appreciation. Is it perfect? No. Is going back perfect? Yes, but we can't do that now. We're just, and that might be a while. So I think we just all need to understand that our teachers are gonna do the best they can with the tools we provide them.
Good afternoon. I'd like to, excuse me, Dr. Laws, my turn. On the MOU, number 4, the timeline, and number 23, terms of agreement, I've asked Dr. Lin or Dr. Morsto to explain this to the public of how this return back is different than from a traditional setting versus a virtual setting. And if you could do that for me, I'd appreciate it.
Ms. Madigan, I'll be happy to do that. And you're referring to which section of the?
Page 2.
Okay.
Okay, 4 is Roman number 4 timeline.
Absolutely.
And on page 16, terms of agreement 23.
Okay. So these 2 different articles that Mr. Gonzalez and our CNTA leadership have negotiated are different articles for different purposes, but they do have interplay considerations. So on page 2, the timeline basically speaks to is starting remote for 4 weeks, in the ending day, or I should say the starting of the ending day for the 4-week remote learning is the 8th of September. The 8th of September. So that's one date to keep in mind. And that's one consideration we have to have with regards to a potential physical return of some form. It was mentioned earlier, and also we have quite a few questions through email and phone calls I'm sure to the board and also to myself and staff as well. And that is what kind of a model you're looking at. You had talked about a 5-day full physical return. Now we're talking about some kind of a hybrid. And what does that mean exactly? And even speaking to one of our speakers this afternoon, we had the same question as well. And I don't want to forecast because this is a negotiated process, but one thing I think I'm safe to be able to say to the public is that we're committed to a full return. And we also committed to a full return, but to provide the utmost safety for not only our staff, but for our kids, obviously. And so any kind of hybrid that we're looking at is because we want to make sure we ensure those elements such as the safe distancing and different things that's required and continue to be updated by the CDC. CDC's guidelines changed again on the 17th, just last Friday. So we'll continue to be fluid, and so I'll leave that to Glenn and the wisdom of our CMT and CSCA leadership. But the reason I mentioned that is because that plays into the definition of safety, as we all know, and I may be regurgitating, but I think it's important to do that, that we're under Governor Newsom's executive order to stay closed. And when I say we mean every single district in the Riverside County, because Riverside County currently is the number 2, if that hasn't changed, I don't believe it has, of all of the counties we have in the state, with the highest metric, quantifiable numbers, to be deemed to be on this watch list, as Governor Newsom calls the list. And his executive order calls for, in order for school to open as quickly as you're ready to get the school to open, but no sooner than, number 1, off his watch list, and number 2, following the date that you have been deemed off his watch list, to go on for another 14 consecutive days without hitting the metrics. And that's consecutive days. So that means if you go for 13 consecutive days, and day 14, your number does not meet the requirement, you're back on the watch list again, and the clock starts ticking all over. And I wanted to put that reality out there clearly for our community and for our staff, because that's much interplay to on page 2, Article 4, in terms of the timeline of our MOU. Because our MOU basically, in section 4, speaks to the earliest ability to return some kind of physical form, either 5 days a week or some kind of a hybrid, is the 8th of September. But if you play into the timeline of the governor's executive order, it doesn't play into very well in terms of before returning in any kind of physical form, and that is prior to the 8th of September. You can just look at the timeline and play it out. But this MOU gives us the ability to go as early as the 8th. I think that's a critical point versus what's in reality right now. In the other timeline that you have mentioned, Ms. King, and that is towards the end of the MOU, and that speaks that's Article 22, that speaks to the agreement to meet and negotiate in case if our parents or staff member are watching and reading carefully of the wording in this MOU. That actually speaks to the need to meet within 10 calendar days if there's any other reasons to renegotiate based on the change of directives that may impact the work that we're doing, obviously including the health data and conditions. That's in there wisely, in my opinion, at the table, but because the obvious fluid change in the situation. Things could change very fluidly based on legislation, based on governor's order, based on CDC guidelines, based on Riverside County Health Department's guidelines, that this MOU perhaps needed to be updated. And that's what that speaks to. It doesn't really speak directly to the reopening. So the opening piece, I think, to the desire of all of us, and I know I speak to every one of us in the CNUSD learning community, we want to return to the classroom as soon as possible. That is a certainty. That is all of our wish. We got to make sure we do it wisely and safely. And the condition that's been placed upon us is beyond just the MOU. It's actually governor's executive order. I personally think as a superintendent that actually give us time to make sure that whenever we can return, as soon as we can do so, while also at the same time provide all the safety measures in place. And naturally, for the past 2.5 weeks, our staff have continued to go through and work out a checklist to make sure all of the different equipment, all the different safety measures are in play, and so that we have ample time to ramp up to that welcome physical return in the future, which by the way, again, includes some type of a model that will give us as much flexibility and safety mitigation measures as possible. And that's up to council. We'll definitely keep the board and the community up to date. But the ability for the board to reopen school as soon as Governor Newsom puts us off the list, and we're keeping off of that list for 14 consecutive days, the earliest is actually the 9th of September, and the 8th of September. And that goes back to your question, hopefully.
So let's go back, Mr. Depot. And the surveys, can you kind of give us an idea of where we're at as far as the request for virtual versus traditional? And would it be possible, if we kept it within the safety standards, to come back traditionally because of the numbers the way they are?
Ms. Marquez, are you referring to the
Surveys.
the program option choices by parents? Yes. We'll try to give you some precise numbers.
Okay, and meanwhile, Mr. Boyd-Nordstrom, there have been parents that have asked that, yeah, I thought I wanted to do virtual, but now I want to do remote. Can you address that, please?
So we understand that the term, as Dr. Wallace had asked earlier as well, the terms distance learning, remote learning, virtual learning are fairly new to all of us. So with that, we have put out communication through our communications team, our frequently asked questions, in our attempt to clarify this for parents, but we do understand that some parents legitimately could have been confused. So as we move forward, our staff here in instructional support and also our school sites are developing an interest list for those families who might have selected virtual and they really wanted remote. And we will, in working with our staffing folks and our various divisions here, we are going to revisit that list, that interest list that we're creating for those families who might be a little bit confused. And we will get back to them shortly, hopefully in the next week or so.
Thank you.
All right, to answer your question, Ms. Marican, where we stand as of now is we have virtual requests for virtual are 14,751, which runs to 28% of our enrollment. And traditional stands at 28,129, which constitutes 54%. And then we have another 17%, which is 8,789 that has not responded.
What was that number?
8,789, which is 17%.
I think the other part of that, which obviously I don't expect now, but I would like to see, I'd like to see site by site, because I think that that's going to impact each site differently. So if there's a way we could get site by site, I would like that.
Well, the dashboard breaks it down by site, and we can provide that. We can send that to you as requested.
Thank you so much.
Do you have data on teacher response? Do we have any data on that? Because again, it looks like, okay, 28%, okay, that frees up, so we're most likely going to lose about the same number of teachers. So that I don't really foresee that affecting class size.
So, Mr. Pollock, I can address the teacher request. When we first put out the what we call our blue sheet to see about interest and we went to remote, we had a total of 347 responses from teachers putting in. That, of course, does not include support staff. So there would be additional support staff that would have the opportunity to possibly put in. So based on the enrollment, I know there's a lot of work going on right now to look at what staffing will need to be in the virtual setting. So with the 347 teachers that have put in for it, we are anticipating needing possibly about 120 more teachers to fully staff the virtual. Again, those numbers are not certain yet because it's based on credential, based on course requests, based on all the behind the scenes that is going on right now. But we can certainly share those numbers as they firm up.
Thank you. I would also like to be a little bit more clear to parents. We're getting a lot of questions. Will my student lose their spot on GLI, on STEM, different programs with the virtual going, So that, even though we have answered in the questions and answers, it's not clear. It's not clear.
And I think for teachers as well, that's a very important point.
I'll go ahead and address the question perhaps from a student parent perspective, and Glenn, maybe you can I'll refer to Glenn to speak about employee and their contractual rights in displacement and positions. So I would say that under the current COVID condition, and again, our memorandum of understanding is only for this time, this duration. This is a temporary stage. Please keep that in mind. So for the 2021 school year, because we have to do staffing, and that's, by the way, again, apologize to our parents, but and I know every district is going through the same kind of registration survey for optional programs, or soon they will need to do that, is because without that information, we simply cannot provide a master schedule, which ultimately, as a dad, even, I need my daughter to have a class schedule, and so that she knows where to attend class, either remotely or physically, right? Unless we know what your interest is, with the option for virtual, we can't do that. We don't know who wants to attend school where. So thank you again for everyone's patience and understanding for that. Once you have signed up, as Ben had mentioned earlier, that we do actually have about 16-17% of our family just have not been able to do that. I want to let you know that we have defaulted them to actually traditional. We'll go through verification and make sure the adjustment, if it's necessary, to make it right. But again, we need to do that because we have to do master schedule. We started our work behind the scenes already in order to open the school. But you could imagine you're basically looking at two different school concepts, right? You have kind of the way things were per site, but then you have this other group out of 54,000 kids in Corona Norco that wants to attend virtual learning environment, but you could attend school perhaps if it's a high school situation in Roosevelt, and you have other kids who is attending school currently at San Diego, or want to go to virtual. We have to completely shuffle our staff, and also please keep in mind, in order to keep the quality of education going and keeping the subject content in the area of experts, credentialing is also something we have to take into consideration. So I wouldn't, really bore or bother, I think, the audience with the details. It is probably one of the most complex situations that I got to dive into just a little bit as a superintendent, because I'm no longer in charge. But having said that, once you're committed to the virtual learning environment for the 2021 school year, we will do everything we can to give the option to transition back into the traditional setting when we're ready to go to tradition. Even that is very fluid, and we don't know when that can happen. But in order to do that, and if we want to make that change, this goes back to your question, and that is, when we want to make that change and we change our mind, how does that work? Will we lose our spot and that kind of thing? From a student parent perspective, I'll try to describe it this way. We cannot guarantee if you say, let's say you choose virtual this year in 2021 now, that we assign you a teacher, that when we open school fully, let's just say it's January, that you will actually return to the same site, the same teacher based on pre-registration information. Why is that? Why can you not guarantee? Because we have already assigned a teacher or about to assign teachers to come to the virtual environment to do the virtual teaching. And depending on at the time, when we're able to open school with a physical return, how many students chooses to return to the regular site, right? If 100% of the students and family at that point chooses to leave virtual, return to the traditional site, I can guarantee you that you will have the programs, because these teachers will go back to the site of teaching with the regular assignment, along with the 100% of students who have signed up for virtual. But in the event that doesn't happen, let's just say even half of the 17% of students, that's about 8,000, 7,000 kids, that's all over the district, are still staying in a virtual learning environment. Those teachers that we have asked to come over to assign them the virtual teaching assignment in about 3 weeks from now, will have to remain in the virtual environment to provide that instruction. We don't know who they are, what credentials they may necessarily have, and what site they come from. So that's the reason why we cannot guarantee, because it's functionally impossible to predict that. But we will do everything we can trying to make that match. So I want to be real clear, the guarantee of return within the 2021, we'll do everything we can. But if the parent is asking, what about 21, 22, once we leave this condition of COVID, it is absolutely guaranteed. Your residents within your particular site, your intra-district status, all of that we will hold in harmless, if you will, and to honor that. And we need to do that because all of our staffing at our current site leading into 2021 also is based on student enrollment that we know. And so for those obvious reasons, I'm stating probably the obvious and taking just a little bit of time, but I think our parents deserve this explanation. And for what's something that I can't guarantee, I'm not going to say that I'm going to guarantee, but I'm going to give you an explanation. If there's something I could guarantee, I would tell you absolutely. So hopefully that answers your question. And Glenn, perhaps you can give a little bit of insights as far as to the teacher transfer and reassignment rights.
So in any typical year, we have contract language that guides us in this based on enrollment through the voluntary or involuntary transfer process, the voluntary or involuntary displacement process. So in the spring, we go through that staffing. In a typical year, if you are either transferred or displaced to another site for the upcoming school year, that becomes your new site. In this agreement, outlined in this agreement, we are adding an additional piece to it, which because we are considering this temporary, this is a COVID situation, that for the upcoming school year, all teachers that go to the virtual setting would be returned to the site they came from for the next year's staffing. So the placement at this time into virtual is not a new placement ongoing. It is a temporary placement so that when we get to staffing for the 21-22 school year, you will be considered returned to the site you came from before the virtual setting. Okay, so it's just another layer that's part of this agreement that speaks to the temporary nature of it.
So to summarize what both you said, 21, 22, they can return. It's any time during the rest of this year is question. The 21, 22, we could guarantee they'll be able to go back to the site that they were previously, both students and teachers.
Provided that obviously we're off the watch list.
Right.
Yeah, if COVID is
So I have a question. From Dr. Lin, right? She's talking about the parents. What if they go on remote, and then we get to September 10, 8, and we said we're gonna go traditional. But if the parents and the family said, no, we're not comfortable going yet because of science. When you look at science, COVID-19 is still here. What are their choices? So they don't want to go traditional, and they might go homeschooling or they go virtual. What do we tell parents? What are their choices?
Yeah, Dr. Laws, that's a great question, and I will be very blunt and straightforward with my response. If I was a parent who had chose remote, remember remote is a part of the option of a traditional return. And the whole reason why remote was even part of the traditional return is because we were anticipating, like every other district in the state of California, the inevitable shutdown once again, possibly during the 2021 school year. We got to be able to pivot very, very quickly because we're not going to return back to the whole distance learning chaos we did once before. So when I chose as a father, that is the option that I wanted to go. I know that remote/distance comes with it as one package. It's either that or virtual, and I have to make that choice. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. But that is a choice that I have to make. So if I went into this remote/physical return choice option, and I start remote for 4 weeks, 5 weeks, whatever it is, and then later on I change my mind and I want to go to a homeschool kind of a situation, and that I believe we can do because a homeschool type of a situation, we will allow that based on our current program requirements anyway. We do have homeschool children in the school district. But to leave the physical return/remote model into a virtual model, it will make it very, very difficult. The reason I say that is because our whole massive scheduling and programming is based on the commitment that we're asking the family to make back on the 19th, or this past Sunday, 19th of July. And so I know that's not an answer. If I were that parent were to ask the school district to make that change for me, may not be something that I would like to hear. But that will be the reality because the schedule would have been at that point would have been already set for all of these kids. That's over almost 29,000 kids for the entire school, and I'm one of them. And in order to change that up will be very difficult. I'm not saying that's impossible, but I would tell you that would be very, very difficult, just based on the master schedule that's already been set.
My last question is to Mr. Alan Kayes. Going back to SB 98, is that at all connected to the 10% cut that was removed? Yeah, because what I'm hearing was they're removing the 10% cut because of SB 98, because then each district has to respond to the question related to learning loss and synchronous teaching in lieu of the LCAP. We're still part of LCAP. That means the money is coming from the state. But what's the connection? Is that connected at all?
So thank you, Dr. Lawless. So at the time of the May revision, back in the middle of May, the governor had proposed, in order to make up the deficit between the shortfall of revenues that the state was projecting for the 2021 budget year, the governor had made a revision that he was going to cut school district budgets by 10%. So between the May revision and the actual enactment adoption of the budget in June, the negotiating that went on between the governor and the legislature was, instead of doing a 10% cut, was to institute a word we all grew very familiar with back in 07-08, which was deferrals. In other words, instead of cutting our budget, we're going to defer what we give you to another point in time. Could be later in the fiscal year, could overlap into the next fiscal year. So we will not be receiving a 10% reduction in revenues. However, revenues that we would be anticipating on a monthly allocation basis may be deferred to another point in time, which means we will probably at some point in time as a district need to consider doing some short-term borrowing, which we call a TRAN, which is a tax revenue anticipation note, to provide us the cash flow necessary to keep everything running until those deferrals come in.
So it's not a condition to SB 98. It's not a connection.
Well, it's part of the enacted budget, so it's really not part of SB 98. It's actually part of the adopted budget that the governor and the legislature signed.
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's it.
Just for my own clarification, so this MOU does not state that we will, when we return, go hybridly. We could, by all means, start off traditionally, correct?
Yes, so provision 23, I believe, does state that the board has the purview to determine the instructional form that we would have for students in the district.
Thank you.
One last question. Again, I appreciate the effort on the MOU, especially including the support staff, as well as the teachers, the psychologists, counselors, nurses. So I appreciate that information being there. I guess I need you to walk me through a scenario, because again, the mental health, social emotional health of our students is really concerning to me. So with the remote aspect, and I'm just going to use my wife's class as an example. Okay, it's the second grade, but it's probably going to be more important at the secondary schools. She has a student maybe that maybe is not coming to, not being part of the class, or there's an issue going on that the connection's not there, or she notices something going on that she's concerned about. How does the process work to get the psychologist involved, the counselor involved, the nurse involved? What's the interactions that we see from the MOU? How is it going to be in real life? Is it the site administrator? Does she call the site administrator? How am I going to be guaranteed that child is going to be taken care of?
Great question. So the MOU speaks specifically to the roles and expectations for the different support staff. The answer to your question is all of the above. The classroom teacher any additional support providers, the administrators at the school site, and in teaming with the parents, can request services at any time. So the counselor will provide those specific services upon referral in the same way they would if we were in a traditional setting. So if there is a concern, either the teacher raises a concern, or maybe the administrator raises a concern, or the parent has a concern. It would be a referral, a call to the school site, to the teacher or the administrator, and a referral would be made to the appropriate support provider, whether it's a school psychologist, a counselor, or both. But it's that team approach that would be taken in a remote setting like it is in the traditional setting.
I just want to make sure it happens. I mean, this is.
Madam President,
It's just concerning to me. I mean, it's tough enough in the traditional classroom for. So I love our teachers, and again, I use my wife as an example, and but it's going to be such a different setting, remotely. So I guess I hope there's checks and balances. With this, and not just fully up to the teacher. I mean, if she's tried three days in a row that students not coming to class or something, the referral. I guess how much onus we put on the teacher versus the admin jumping in and then contacting the counselor and the psychologist.
Mr. Pollack, if I could just weigh in just a little bit. So to your point, and I know Glenn, in essence said the same thing too. The MOU is the agreement between the school district and the Teachers Association. So there's that piece right there in terms of setting expectation. But we got to support teachers. I mean, that, maybe perhaps we're taking it for granted because that's what we've always done in a traditional setting. But I don't want that to go without being on set. Especially in the COVID time. We got to make sure that we, starting with us, leadership up at the top, to support our site administrators, because the reality is the burden of the proof of the work, if you will, is shifting very quickly. If you go back to the 13th of March all the way to now, it's now shifting already, landing on principles, and much, much more so yet to come. So we got to make sure we are very clear with expectations. And I know that, for example, I'm stepping back a little bit, and on the safety book on the Senate leadership that we have put together, to have clarity what that looks like, literally to create a checklist for every school, because every school's got a different situation. Some of our schools are much older than other newer ones, just ventilation alone. Those kind of checklists that we got to do up here is one thing is we say it to you, put it on a piece of paper, right? But to make sure that we support our principal at the site, to make sure you walk through every classroom in collaboration with our teacher and classified employees is the real work. So not so much adding to anything Glenn's already said, but it's giving you the level of assurance. So we take this very seriously. So I think the best way as a superintendent I can assure you to perhaps lessen your worry is that we carry that burden too. And we will make sure that we provide the clarity and also that support to our principals and site administration to support our teachers and classified employees so they can get the job done. The student that Lisa's talking about, when you have 97% attendance rate, but 13 students not reporting, that's a problem. Because we don't know what's going on. This is not about learning. Are they okay? And that's what I'm hearing Lisa say, that through our counselors and the support work that we're doing along with the site, we got to identify them and provide the proper support. That means contacting the parents. I'll stop here because I think Dr. Simon would like to weigh in on this.
Actually, if I may hop in here, it really is something that we are absolutely all concerned with. I had the opportunity to be on a Zoom call with, probably been two and a half weeks ago now, with actually all the counselors throughout the district, and we have a lot. And they had just some incredible numbers that I think would be good for, if we could get that from Anita Shirley, put that in a Friday mail out of how many contacts, because I wish I had the numbers with me, because I was astounded by how much they have done already. And like I said, this was probably about 3 weeks ago. So they've been on it. Thank you, Lisa, for pointing out the exact number of those students in Eastvale that of our 6 schools. Because if they haven't already started, I guarantee by tomorrow they will be on it. because it is a different environment, and your point, Bill, is so well taken. Our teachers are the front line, they're the mandated reporters. They see and touch things, and I know we have the young lady back here works at Chalk, and she knows exactly what I'm talking about. And if we don't have that oversight, we need to step it up to the 10th degree, because sometimes it can be the difference between life and death, quite frankly. So, but I think if we could get those numbers of where they're at, what they've done so far, and then really even what their game plan is, because I know they were still even creating at that point, but it was quite impressive with what they have done thus far. So, thank you, Lisa.
Dr. Wallace had a question.
Yeah, I just wanted to call the, I want to call the question because I trust that our administration and CNTA and CSEA later on have done due diligence the best they can to keep our schools safe and to really engage our students. It's going to be a continuing process, and I trust that they will continue to explore the safety and the student engagement issues. So, really, I want to call the question, if I can, if I may. I so move to accept the recommendation.
So the first action item would be item 5A, which would be to approve the MOU with CNTA.
Okay, so we all know what we're voting, right? Yes, is the one that we accept the whole MOU. I just wanna make sure that we all understand. Okay. Alrighty, so, yes, Jose moved. Okay, you said.
Do you want me to make
Oh, I'm sorry.
second? I already did. Second.
Elizabeth moved, John second. Okay, I wanna take a roll. Bill, Jose moved.
Yeah, Jose moved it.
And then he said.
It's hard for me to hear.
Okay. Jose moved and John. Okay, roll call now. John.
Yes.
Lisa. No. Jose.
Yes.
Yes.
And then the second item is 5B, would be the MOU with CSEA.
So I will take roll. Oh, I need a motion.
I would move, we accept the CSEA MOU.
I see. I'm gonna take roll. Bill?
Yes.
Mary? Yes. Lisa? Yes. John?
Yes.
Jose?
Yes.
Any further questions? Okay. Can I get a motion to adjourn the meeting?
Second.
Need a second?
Second.
Roll call. Bill? Mary? Yes. Lisa? Yes. John?
Yes.
Jose?
I can't hear you. What's the motion? I can't hear you.
To adjourn.
To adjourn the meeting.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Meeting adjourned.